All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the science of what's actually happening inside your brain when you watch pornography, pulling from some fascinating research by neurosurgeons and behavioral scientists. So let's just jump right in with a really big question. Can the things you watch online actually physically change the structure of your brain? I mean, really change the wiring? For decades, neuroscientists have been digging into this, and the answer they've come back with is a pretty definitive yes. How exactly that works is what we're going to break down today. Okay, so let's kick things off with what might be a pretty wild idea for some of you. Your habits, they aren't just abstract things you do. They are actively, physically sculpting the circuitry inside your head. Yet, check out this quote from neurosurgeon Dr. Donald Hilton. He says, learning sculpts the brain. It's not a metaphor, it literally changes the structure. And some kinds of learning pack a much bigger punch than others, especially when there's a powerful reward tied to them. Think about it like this. The more you walk down a path in a field, the deeper the rut gets, right? It's the exact same principle in your brain. The more you repeat a behavior, the more your brain paves this super efficient highway for it. And that's exactly why breaking a habit can feel so incredibly difficult. And we're not just talking in metaphors here. Some studies looking at compulsive users are finding real, measurable changes. We're talking about things like potential gray matter shrinkage in the brain's reward system. That's the part that processes pleasure, and weaker connections between that reward system and your prefrontal cortex, which is supposed to be the CEO, the hub for judgment and long-term thinking. Dr. Hilton has another fantastic analogy for this. He says it's like wearing out the brake pads on your brain. That frontal cortex, your thinking brain, is supposed to hit the brakes and say, hey, hold on a second, let's think about this. But this research suggests that compulsive use can wear those brake pads right down, making it way, way harder to stop. So you see all this evidence of the brain physically changing, and that leads us straight into a pretty big and still ongoing debate in the scientific community. Which brings us to the big question, right? If it's changing your brain like this, does that make it a clinical addiction? It sounds like it should be a simple yes or no, but honestly, the experts are really split on this one. So you've basically got these two competing camps. On one side, you have the addiction view. They say, look, if there's tolerance and withdrawal, it's an addiction. Pretty standard. But then you have the World Health Organization, and they see it differently. They classify it as compulsive sexual behavior disorder. And the key difference here, it's seen as an impulse control problem, and withdrawal isn't a required piece of the puzzle for a diagnosis. That's a huge distinction. So to try and get some clarity on this whole withdrawal thing, a recent study in 2023 decided to put it to the test. They set up a proper, randomized controlled experiment to see what actually happens. And what they found was, well, pretty surprising. They had regular users stop for a full week. And guess what? They didn't really report any significant withdrawal symptoms, the anxiety, the irritability, that the addiction model would have predicted. Now, this one study doesn't end the debate, of course, but it definitely adds some serious weight to that impulse control side of the argument. Okay, so if the addiction label is still kind of up in the air, are there other ways we can measure the effects on our behavior? Turns out, yes, absolutely. Let's talk about a cool concept called delayed discounting. It sounds complicated, but it's basically a scientific way to measure how impulsive we are. It boils down to this. Would you rather have, say, $10 right now or $20 in a month? Your answer says a lot about whether your brain prioritizes immediate rewards over bigger ones down the road. And researchers in the Journal of Sex Research really dug into this. First, they tracked people over time and found that the more porn someone used, the more impulsive their decision-making was 4 weeks later. But here's the really wild part. In a separate experiment, they had people stop using it for 3 weeks. And what happened? Their impulsivity actually went down. They became more patient, more willing to wait for that bigger future reward. That's a direct causal link. So what's the big takeaway here? It really seems like this habit trains your brain to want things now. That constant, instant gratification on screen can actually spill over and change how you make decisions about everything else in your life. Your money, your career goals, you name it. But why does this happen? What's going on under the hood to cause this shift? Well, it all seems to come back to a little molecule you've probably heard of, dopamine. Okay, so think about the internet, right? It's an endless fire hose of new, extreme, high-intensity stuff. When you expose your brain's reward system to that kind of flood over and over again, it does what it has to do to protect itself. It becomes less sensitive. It's like turning the volume down on a speaker. And the side effect is that normal, everyday pleasures, a great meal, a walk outside, even real human connection, they just don't hit the same. They can start to feel kind of blah. But here's the good news. The research shows this isn't necessarily permanent. By taking a break, by stepping away from that constant fire hose of stimulation, you give your brain a chance to recalibrate. Some people call this a dopamine reset. It's like letting your ears rest after a loud concert. Your reward system can start to become sensitive again to more subtle, natural pleasures. So we've talked about brain structure, we've talked about decision making. Now let's bring it all together and look at where this stuff can really hit home in our actual, real-world relationships. There's a great point made by neuroscientist Andrew Huberman. He basically says that your brain gets good at what you practice. So if your brain learns that arousal comes from watching other people on a screen, that skill doesn't just magically transfer over to when you're actually with a real person one-on-one. And that right there is really the heart of the matter. What you see on screen is often a performance, right? It's not about mutual connection. And when that's your main source of learning, it can set up these totally unrealistic expectations. Real intimacy, with all its nuances and give and take, can start to feel disappointing or even boring by comparison. So all of this leaves us with one final, and I think really important question to ask yourself. We're all building a script for what intimacy is supposed to be, based on our experiences. In a world where we're surrounded by screens, you have to ask, who is writing your script? Is it you? Or is it an industry designed to sell you novelty and performance?